He spent years holding on to a resentment he believed was justified. She had no idea why he always looked at her with such coldness. But some stories do not begin with romance. They begin with a broken engine, a repair shop, sharp arguments, and a chemistry far too dangerous to ignore. The wrench slipped, and Tristan Oakley's knuckle cracked against the engine block of a 1967 Shelby GT500. He didn't pull his hand back. He just watched the thin line of blood rise on his skin, then wiped it on his jeans and went back to work. The shop was quiet at this hour. 6 in the morning, no one else in yet, just him and the low hum of the overhead lights and the smell of motor oil that had seeped into every corner of the building, into the concrete floor, into the walls, into his clothes. He breathed it in the way some people breathe in cologne before a date. It was his. All of it. Oakley Performance. The sign outside was simple. Black letters on steel. No gold trim. No family crest. Nothing that connected it to the Oakley name that mattered in this city. The one printed on legal briefs and courtroom doors and fundraiser invitations. His father's name. Tristan had that name too. He just refused to use it for the same things. He'd graduated from law school at 23, top 15 in his class. His father had already cleared a desk for him at the firm, had already told partners that his son would be joining. Tristan remembered sitting in his car outside the firm's glass building on what was supposed to be his first day, engine running, hands on the wheel. He sat there for 40 minutes, then he drove away and never went back. His mother understood. She always did. The shop started small, a rented garage bay, second-hand tools, word of mouth. He was good with engines the way his father was good with juries. Instinctive, patient when it counted. Within 2 years, collectors were bringing him cars that cost more than most people's houses. Within 3, he had a team of 5 mechanics and a waiting list. His father called it a phase, then a rebellion, then a waste. Tristan called it the only honest thing he'd ever done. If this story is touching your heart, show your support. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel and share it with your friends. Every action helps us keep bringing you new stories full of emotion. He straightened up now and stretched his back. The Shelby needed a new carburetor, and he'd already sourced one from a dealer in Virginia. He pulled a rag from his back pocket and cleaned his hands slowly, methodically. The way he did everything mechanical, with focus that left no room for the thoughts he didn't want. But some mornings, the thoughts came anyway. His mother's face. Not the face she wore now, rested, bright, finally her own again, but the one she wore for years. The one that smiled at dinner parties while her eyes stayed flat. The one that said goodnight to him when he was 19 and home from college, standing in the hallway of that big house, her robe pulled tight around her like armor she didn't believe in. He'd known before she told him. A father who worked late 3 nights a week, phone calls taken in the other room, the faint wrong scent of perfume on a jacket left over a chair. Tristan noticed at 17 but said nothing, because his mother said nothing, and he thought that was how it worked. You loved someone and you endured. He was wrong. At 25, he found her sitting on the kitchen floor at 2 in the morning, still in her hospital scrubs, crying without sound. She was a surgeon, one of the best in the city, and she was sitting on cold tile, breaking apart so quietly that he almost didn't hear her from his room down the hall. He sat beside her. Didn't ask, just waited. She told him everything, years of it. A woman his father had been seeing since before Tristan finished college, not a fling. A relationship, a parallel life built in the gaps of the one he shared with her. Tristan held her hand that night, and in the morning he called a lawyer, a good one who owed him nothing and his father even less. The divorce took 7 months. His mother moved out of the house and into a townhouse near the hospital. She cut her hair short, started running in the mornings, lost the hollowness in her cheeks. She came back to life the way a garden comes back after a long frost, slowly, then all at once, color returning where there had been none. His father didn't fight it. He didn't need to. The moment the papers were signed, he moved the other woman in, and with her came her daughter. Tristan had seen the girl a handful of times since then. At his father's house during the 2 or 3 obligatory dinners he couldn't avoid, once at a restaurant by accident. She was always at the edge of things, quiet, polite, occupying space he refused to acknowledge. He didn't know her, didn't want to. What he knew was simpler and harder. She was the daughter of the woman who had taken his mother's place. That was enough. That was more than enough. And somewhere beneath that, in a place he kept locked, bolted, buried, there was something else. Something he noticed the first time he saw her across his father's dining room and hated himself for noticing. She was beautiful. Not the kind of beautiful that announced itself. The kind that crept in sideways, through a gesture, a tilt of the head, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she thought no one was watching. The kind that made him look twice and then look away, angry at his own eyes for betraying him. He set the wrench down on the workbench, wiped his hands one more time. The shop would open in an hour, and there was coffee to make and invoices to sort and a world that had nothing to do with his father or his father's choices or the quiet girl with soft eyes who lived in a house Tristan refused to enter. He had built this life with his own hands. He intended to keep it clean. The dashboard light had been blinking for 3 days. Madeleine Marlowe had ignored it the way she ignored most warnings, with a calm, stubborn faith that things would sort themselves out. They did not sort themselves out. The engine coughed twice on Ridgewood Avenue, shuddered like a wet dog, and died. The car rolled to a slow, humiliating stop in the right lane, hazard lights ticking into the morning air like a metronome counting down her patience. She sat there for a moment, hands still on the wheel, eyes closed. The clinic expected her at noon. Her pathology lecture started in 40 minutes. And her car, a 10-year-old sedan that had survived college, 2 cross-state moves and more drive-through coffee runs than she could count, had finally given up. She got out, popped the hood, stared at the engine. She knew nothing about engines. Absolutely nothing. But she leaned in anyway, as if looking hard enough might make something obvious reveal itself. A loose wire, maybe. A blinking sign that said, "Push here." Nothing blinked. Nothing revealed itself. Madeleine was 24. In her last year of veterinary school, top of her clinical rotation, the student who stayed late to sit with post-surgical animals because she couldn't stand the thought of them waking up alone. She could read a dog's blood work and know what was wrong before the senior vet finished her coffee. She could calm a frightened horse with just her hands and her voice, and a patience that seemed to come from somewhere bottomless. But a car engine was a foreign country. She straightened up and reached for her phone, already scrolling for a tow service when a black car pulled up beside hers. Low, clean, the kind of car that made a sound like a promise when it idled. The window came down, and her stomach dropped. Tristan Oakley sat behind the wheel, one hand resting on top of it, his jaw set in that particular way she'd memorized without meaning to. She'd seen him maybe 5 times in 4 years, always from a distance, always briefly, and every single time his eyes had landed on her like a verdict. He didn't like her. She'd known that from the first dinner at her stepfather's house, when she'd smiled at him across the table, and he'd looked through her as if she were glass. She'd tried not to care. She told herself it didn't matter, that people were allowed to dislike other people without reason. But the truth sat in her chest like a stone she couldn't swallow. She wanted to know why. And over time, the hurt had dried into something harder. A quiet irritation she kept folded inside her, neat and small, because Madeleine did not make scenes. He was already out of his car. He walked past her without a word, straight to the open hood. She watched his back, broad under a dark shirt, his sleeves pushed up to his elbows. His hands moved across the engine the way hers moved across an animal. Sure. Practiced, knowing where to press. "It started making a noise yesterday," she said, hating that her voice came out uneven. "Like a clicking, and then this morning it just—" "I can see what happened." He didn't look at her. His fingers traced something near the belt, then moved lower. She noticed a thin scar on his knuckle, fresh and pink. "This isn't a quick fix," he said. "The timing belt's gone. Probably took something else with it." He straightened and finally turned to face her. His eyes. She'd forgotten how sharp they were. A green that didn't soften at the edges, that didn't offer anything warm. He looked at her the way he always did, like she was something he'd rather not deal with. "You'll need a tow," he said. "I'll call one." "You'll be waiting an hour." She held his gaze. The irritation stirred. "Then I'll wait." Something shifted in his face. A muscle in his jaw tightened, released. He looked away, then back, and let out a breath that sounded like it cost him something. "Get in the car. I'll take you to campus. I'll have someone bring your car to my shop." She blinked. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." She opened her mouth, closed it, grabbed her bag from the passenger seat and walked to his car. The leather inside smelled like cedar, and something faintly metallic, like tools kept close. She buckled her seatbelt without looking at him. They drove in silence. Complete, suffocating silence. She stared out the window. He stared at the road. The radio was off. The only sound was the engine, steady and low, and her own heartbeat, which she was certain he could hear. When he pulled up to the veterinary building, she reached for the door handle. "Pick it up at the end of the day," he said. Nothing else. "Thank you," she managed. He didn't answer. The car pulled away before she'd finished closing the door. She stood on the sidewalk, bag in hand, watching the black car disappear around the corner. Her hands were shaking and she didn't fully understand why. That evening she took a cab to the shop. A mechanic with kind eyes pointed toward the back. She walked around a half-dismantled sports car and found Tristan on the ground, under her sedan, only his legs visible. "Tristan?" He slid out, stood, and without a word, turned and walked toward the back office. She followed. "Is my car ready?" He stopped at the doorway but didn't face her. "Come back tomorrow." "Tomorrow? You said end of the day." "I said pick it up. I didn't say it'd be done." He disappeared through the door. She stood there, grease-scented air around her, the fluorescent lights buzzing above. Her hands curled into fists at her sides. She would come back tomorrow, and the day after that if she had to. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. 4 days in a row, Madeline walked into Oakley Performance, and 4 days in a row, she was told the same thing. Not ready yet. Come back tomorrow. On Tuesday, Tristan hadn't even looked at her. He was under a silver Porsche, and one of his mechanics, a tall man with a kind voice, relayed the message. On Wednesday, she found Tristan in the back, bent over a workbench, and he gave her 2 words without turning around. Not yet. Thursday, he at least faced her, arms crossed, expression flat, and said something about a part that needed ordering. She nodded, polite as always, and left. Friday, she almost didn't go. She sat in her apartment, her stepfather's apartment, staring at the ceiling, wondering why she kept showing up at a place where she clearly wasn't welcome. She had a classmate who could drive her to campus. She had cab money. She didn't need that car this very second. But something pulled her back each time, something beyond the car. She went on Friday. Same answer, same cold delivery. She smiled tightly and walked out. Saturday, she didn't go. She spent the day at the clinic, holding a 3-legged rescue cat named Biscuit against her chest while filling out charts. The cat purred against her collarbone, and she pressed her nose into its fur and breathed in that warm, dusty animal smell that always steadied her. Sunday, she cleaned her room and reorganized her textbooks, and tried not to think about green eyes that looked at her like she was a problem to be solved. Monday morning, she woke up angry. It was unfamiliar, the anger. Madeline didn't do angry. She did patient. She did understanding. She did quiet withdrawal. But this hot rising thing in her chest, was new. A full week. A full week of being told to wait, of rearranging her schedule around a car that should have been fixed in 2 days, of being dismissed by a man who wouldn't even tell her what his problem was. She got dressed without thinking about what she put on, grabbed her keys, called a cab. She arrived at the shop just before closing. The bay doors were still open, the last of the daylight slanting across the concrete floor in long amber stripes. 2 mechanics were wiping down tools. One of them looked up when she walked in and opened his mouth to speak, but she was already past him. Tristan was in the back office, leaning against his desk, phone in hand. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway, and something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or the beginning of amusement, which made her angrier. "I'm taking my car somewhere else," she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking at her sides. "You've had it for a week, and every single day I come here, and you tell me the same thing, and I'm done. I'll have it towed tonight." He set the phone down slowly, leaned back. looked at her the way a person looks at a storm rolling in, not afraid but alert. "You want the truth? I want my car." He tilted his head. The corner of his mouth twitched. "The car's been ready since day one." Silence. She felt the words land in her chest before her brain fully processed them. Ready since day one. A week of her time. A week of coming and going, arranging rides, rescheduling study sessions, smiling politely at mechanics who probably knew and said nothing. Her face went hot. Not pink. Red. She crossed the room in 3 steps, planted her index finger against his chest, hard, right in the center, and looked up at him with eyes that burned. "Why? Why would you do that? What have I ever done to you?" He didn't step back. Her finger was still on his chest, and she could feel the warmth of him through his shirt, the solid wall of him. His eyes changed. The amusement vanished, replaced by something darker, something tangled. "Don't play innocent," he said. His voice was low and rough at the edges. "Play innocent about what?" "About your mother. About my father. About all of it." She stared at him. Her finger fell away. "What about my mother and your father?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're really going to stand there and pretend you don't know?" "Know what?" He pushed off the desk. The space between them disappeared. She could smell engine oil and cedar and something underneath. Warm skin, clean sweat. His voice came out hard and sharp, each word a separate blade. "Your mother was my father's mistress for years. Years. While my mother was home, loving him, waiting for him, losing herself piece by piece. Your mother helped destroy her. And when the divorce finally happened, your mother moved right in, took her place, wore her house like a coat." Madeline's lips parted. No sound came out. The room tilted. She reached for the edge of the desk behind her. Her fingers found it and gripped. "That's not—" she started, but the sentence broke apart before it could form. "Get out," he said. The words were quiet now, which made them worse. "And don't come back." She wanted to speak, wanted to ask 100 questions that were already piling up behind her eyes, but he turned away, walked through the door to the garage and slammed it shut behind him. The sound echoed through the empty shop. She stood there for a long time, alone with the fluorescent hum and the smell of metal and the feeling of a world she thought she understood, cracking right down the center. The kitchen smelled like garlic and rosemary, and Madeline sat at the dinner table pretending to eat while she studied her mother's face. 7 days had passed since Tristan's words had torn a hole through everything she believed. 7 days of replaying his voice in her head, the flatness of it, the certainty. Your mother was my father's mistress for years. She had tried to dismiss it, tried to file it under anger and exaggeration and the bitterness of a broken family. But the sentence wouldn't stay filed. It kept crawling back, dragging questions behind it. Her mother sat across from her now, talking to Richard, her stepfather, about a dinner party next weekend. Something about place settings, something about wine. Madeline watched her mother's hands as she spoke, her manicured nails, the way she touched Richard's arm with an ease that looked practiced. Comfortable. Had it always been this comfortable? Madeline thought about the early days when her mother first introduced Richard. She'd said he was a colleague, then a friend, then more. The timeline had always been a little blurry, and Madeline hadn't pushed because her mother was happy, and after losing her father, her real father, the quiet man with rough hands who died when she was 19 and left her an inheritance she'd never touched, she wanted her mother to be happy. But now, the blur felt deliberate. She opened her mouth to ask something, closed it. Her mother looked up. "You're barely eating, Maddie." "Not hungry." Richard glanced at her without interest and went back to his phone. Madeline pushed a piece of chicken across her plate and let the moment pass. She tried twice more that week, once in the car with her mother on the way back from a grocery run. She'd asked carefully how exactly her mother and Richard had met. Her mother gave the same answer she always gave, through mutual friends at a dinner. Madeline pushed. "Were you seeing each other before his divorce?" Her mother's face tightened. "That's none of your business, Madeline." That answer told her everything. On a Thursday evening, she stood outside Oakley Performance again. The bay doors were half closed. The lights inside were dimmed to that amber glow that made the shop look almost warm. She walked through the side entrance and found his office at the back. He was sitting behind the desk, a pen in his hand, paperwork spread in front of him. When he saw her, he stood so fast, the chair rolled back and hit the wall. "I told you not to come back." "I know what you told me." "Then why are you here?" "Because I deserve to know." Her voice cracked on the last word. She didn't fix it. "I'm not leaving until you tell me everything. All of it. From the beginning." He stared at her. His jaw worked. She could see him building the wall, the one he always put between them, the one made of contempt and distance and all the things he'd decided she was before he ever gave her a chance. "I'm not going." She said it softer this time, and the tears came without permission. They slid down her cheeks and she didn't wipe them. She let him see. Something broke in his face. It was small, just a shift in his eyes, a loosening of his shoulders. But she saw it. The wall didn't come down, but a crack appeared. And through that crack, for the first time, he looked at her like a person instead of a symbol. "Sit down," he said quietly. She sat. He told her everything. Not quickly, not easily. He started with his mother, a surgeon, brilliant, warm, the kind of woman who remembered every nurse's birthday and stayed late for patients who were afraid. He told Madeline how his mother had loved his father completely, blindly, the way some people love before they learn to protect themselves. How his father had taken that love and treated it like furniture, something that would always be there, something he didn't need to maintain. He told her about the years of lies, the late nights, the perfume on jackets, how he'd known since he was 17 but said nothing, because his mother said nothing. He told her about the kitchen floor. 2 a.m, his mother in scrubs, crying without sound. He told her how he held her hand and helped her leave, how the divorce was clean but not painless, how his mother had walked out of that house with nothing but her dignity and rebuilt her entire life from the ground up. And then, with a voice that finally softened, he told Madeline about the man who came after, a doctor who had bought the hospital where his mother worked. A man named David, generous and kind and so visibly in love with her that even Tristan, who had stopped believing in that word, couldn't deny it. They were engaged now. His mother laughed again. She was herself again. Madeline sat still through all of it, tears running, hands folded in her lap, not interrupting. When he finished, the silence filled the room like water. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for what my mother did. I know that doesn't fix anything." He rubbed his face with both hands. "I'm sorry too for how I treated you. You didn't deserve any of it." She nodded, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. He reached for her phone on the desk edge. "Your number, in case you need anything." She watched him type his number in, then took his phone and did the same. Their fingers nearly touched during the exchange. Neither mentioned it. She stood to leave. At the door, she turned back. "Thank you for telling me." He didn't answer right away. Just looked at her, really looked, for the first time without the armor. "Drive safe," he said. She walked out into the cool night air, her chest aching with a strange, raw tenderness that she couldn't name. The truth had broken something. But standing there under the parking lot lights, breathing in the evening cold, she felt impossibly that something new had just begun. She waited until the plates were served. Not out of strategy, but because her hands wouldn't stop trembling, and she needed both of them steady around a glass of water before she could say what she'd come downstairs to say. Her mother had made roast chicken, the kind she made when she wanted the house to feel like a home, with thyme tucked under the skin and potatoes golden at the edges. The smell should have been comforting. It wasn't. Richard sat at the head of the table, reading something on his phone between bites. Her mother sat beside him, napkin on her lap, talking about a colleague's retirement party. Normal. Everything aggressively normal. Madeline set her fork down. "I need to ask you something," she said, "and I need the truth." Her mother's hand stilled mid-reach for the salt. Richard looked up slowly, the way people look up when they already know they won't like what's coming. "Was your relationship with Richard already happening while he was still married?" The silence that followed wasn't the kind that holds space for an honest answer. It was the kind that calculates. Her mother glanced at Richard. He gave a tiny shake of his head, almost imperceptible, but Madeline caught it. "Where is this coming from?" her mother asked. "It doesn't matter where it's coming from." "Was it?" "Madeline, this isn't appropriate dinner conversation." "Was it?" Richard set his phone down with a controlled click against the table. "You're being dramatic. Whatever someone told you, they're filling your head with nonsense. Your mother and I..." "His son told me." She looked directly at her mother. "Tristan told me everything. About the affair. About his mother. About what she went through." Her mother's face did something Madeline had never seen before. It rearranged itself. The warmth drained out, replaced by a stillness that looked almost like fear. "That boy has always been bitter," Richard said. His voice was flat and hard, the courtroom voice, the one designed to make the other person feel small. "He resents me for moving on. He has no idea what my marriage was like. I'm not asking about your marriage. I'm asking about my mother." "Enough." Richard's palm hit the table, not hard, but enough to make the silverware jump. "This is childish nonsense, and I won't sit here and be interrogated in my own home." Madeline looked at her mother, waited, begged, silently, for her to say something real. Her mother's eyes were wet, but she pressed her lips together and said, "It's complicated, Maddie, you wouldn't understand." That was the answer, not a denial, not an explanation. A door shut in her face gently, the way her mother had always shut doors, with enough softness to make the rejection feel like kindness. Madeline stood. Her chair scraped against the floor. "I'm moving out." "Don't be ridiculous," Richard said. "Maddie, please." Her mother reached for her hand. "I love you, Mom, but I can't stay here knowing what I know and pretending I don't." She went upstairs before either of them could respond, closed her bedroom door, sat on the edge of her bed with her phone in her hands and her heart hammering so loudly she could feel it in her fingertips. She messaged her 2 closest friends first, told them she needed a place. They responded immediately. Concern, offers of couches, questions she wasn't ready to answer. She thanked them and said she'd explain later. Then she opened a new message, typed his name. Her thumb hovered over the keyboard for a long time. She wasn't sure why she was texting him instead of scrolling rental listings. Maybe because he was the only person in the world right now who understood exactly why she needed to leave. Maybe because his number in her phone still felt like a bridge she hadn't fully crossed. She typed, "Do you happen to know of any apartments available? I'm looking to move quickly." The reply came in under a minute. "The one next to mine is empty. 2 apartments per floor. It's quiet." She stared at the screen next to his. She imagined the hallway, a shared wall, the proximity of someone who had looked at her with contempt for 4 years and only just stopped. But he had also been the one to tell her the truth when no one else would. "Can you send me the details?" He did. Rent, square footage, the building manager's number. At the bottom, he added, "It's a decent place. Good light in the mornings." She read that last line 3 times. Good light in the mornings, such a small thing to mention, such an ordinary human thing. She pictured him typing it, perhaps hesitating, perhaps adding it, and then almost deleting it. She called the building manager the next morning. Downstairs, her mother knocked softly on her bedroom door and asked if they could talk. Madeline opened the door, looked at her mother's tired face, and felt the ache of loving someone whose choices she could no longer defend. "I've already signed," she said gently. "I move in 2 weeks." Her mother's eyes filled, but she didn't argue. She just nodded, turned, and walked back down the hall. That night, lying in bed, Madeline thought about mornings, about light coming through new windows, about starting over in a place where no one had lied to her. She fell asleep with her phone on the pillow, his last message still on the screen. The apartment smelled like fresh paint and dust and possibility. Madeline stood in the middle of the empty living room, her sneakers squeaking against the hardwood floor, 3 boxes at her feet, and nothing on the walls. The afternoon light came through the windows exactly the way he'd described, warm, generous, falling in wide beams across the floor, like someone had arranged it on purpose. She'd brought only what was hers. Clothes, books, a few framed photos, the worn quilt her father had kept on his reading chair. She'd used a portion of the inheritance, his inheritance, the money she'd kept untouched and invested since she was 19, to cover the deposit, the first month's rent, and the basics. A bed, a small table with 2 chairs, a set of pots her friend Clara had insisted she take, a coffee maker that Clara's boyfriend had wrapped in newspaper like it was made of glass. She unpacked slowly, letting each item find its place. The quilt went on the bed. The photo of her father, standing in front of his hardware store squinting into the sun, his smile crooked and real, went on the nightstand. Her veterinary textbooks lined the windowsill because she didn't have a bookshelf yet. By evening the apartment looked half-finished and entirely hers. She sat on the floor beside the bed, back against the wall, and pulled out her phone. Moved in. Officially your neighbor. His reply came fast. Welcome to the floor. If you need anything, the door next to yours belongs to someone who's tolerable most days. She smiled. It was the first time he'd been anything close to funny with her, and the warmth that spread through her chest surprised her. She typed back, "Tolerable is a strong word. I'll believe it when I see it." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Fair enough. Good night, Madeline. She read her name on the screen and felt something shift. He'd never used it before, not once, not in any of their encounters. She'd been you and silence and cold shoulders, but there it was now. Madeline. 6 letters that somehow sounded different coming from him. Good night, Tristan. The days that followed had a rhythm she didn't plan. She'd leave for campus in the morning and sometimes hear his door close seconds before hers. They'd nod in the hallway, brief and careful, like 2 people learning a new language, 1 word at a time. She'd come home to find a small bag of groceries at her door, milk, bread, eggs, with no note. She brought it up once, and he shrugged and said the store was on his way. He never asked to come in. She never asked him to. Until the night she made pasta. It was a recipe from her father, the only one she knew by heart. Garlic, tomatoes, basil from a windowsill plant, and pasta cooked just past the point her classmates would call correct. Her father had liked it soft. So did she. She made too much. She always made too much. And standing in her kitchen, stirring the pot, she heard his door open and close in the hallway. And before she could think about it, she was knocking on his door with a wooden spoon still in her hand. He opened it in a grey shirt and jeans, barefoot, his hair pushed back like he'd been running his hands through it. He looked at the spoon, then at her. "I made too much pasta," she said. "Do you want some?" He leaned against the doorframe. "What kind? The kind where you don't ask questions and just say yes." Something happened at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but the ghost of one. "Give me 5 minutes." He showed up at her door with a bottle of red wine and 2 glasses he'd clearly just washed, because one still had a drop of water running down the stem. They sat at her small table, the one that barely fit 2 plates and a candle she'd lit because the overhead light was too harsh, and ate. The pasta was good. The wine was better. But what surprised her was the conversation. He talked, really talked, about the shop, about a '65 Mustang he was restoring for a client who visited every Saturday just to watch the progress, about his mother's engagement party, how David had cried during his toast and Tristan had pretended not to notice. He talked with his hands when he got into a story, gesturing with his fork, almost knocking over the wine glass twice. She laughed, genuinely, loudly, in a way she hadn't in weeks. And when she did, he stopped mid-sentence and looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read, like he was memorizing something. The candle burned low, the wine bottle emptied. He helped her wash the dishes, standing beside her at the sink, close enough that their elbows bumped and neither moved away. At the door, she thanked him for the wine. He said nothing for a moment. Then he leaned in and pressed his lips to her cheek. Not quickly. He lingered there, long enough for her to feel the warmth of his mouth, the faint scratch of stubble, the slow exhale against her skin. Long enough for her eyes to close and her fingers to curl at her sides. When he pulled back, his eyes held hers for a beat too long. "Good night, Madeline." He said her name differently now, softer, like he was being careful with it. She closed the door and stood with her back against it, one hand pressed to the cheek he'd kissed, her heart doing something reckless and undeniable. The dishes were clean, the candle had gone out, and the apartment that had smelled like paint and dust now smelled like garlic and wine, and the beginning of something she wasn't ready to name. Music leaked through Tristan's door before Madeline even reached the hallway. Something old, something with brass and piano and a rhythm that made her think of summer barbecues and backyard laughter. She adjusted the plate in her hands, a lemon cake she'd baked that morning from a recipe she'd found in her father's old notebook, handwritten in his cramped, tilted letters, and knocked. The door swung open, and Tristan stood there in a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, a dish towel over one shoulder, and an expression she'd never seen on him before. Relaxed. Almost light. "You brought cake," he said. "You told me not to bring anything. And you ignored me. Get used to it." He took the plate from her, and his fingers brushed hers. A small collision. He didn't pull away immediately. Neither did she. The apartment was bigger than hers, or maybe it just felt that way because it was full of people. 5 of them, spread across the living room and kitchen. 3 men and 2 women all talking over each other, with the kind of ease that comes from years of friendship. The smell of grilled meat and roasted peppers filled the air. Someone had brought beer. Someone else had brought a salad that no one was eating. "Everyone," Tristan said, loud enough to cut through the noise. "This is Madeline. She lives next door." A chorus of greetings. Waves, smiles, a woman named Rachel who immediately pulled her into a conversation about the lemon cake. Madeline felt the warmth of being welcomed and let herself sink into it. Tristan stayed close. She noticed, even when she tried not to. When she moved to the kitchen to refill her glass, he was already there, pouring water from the filter before she could reach for it. When she sat on the couch, he sat on the arm of it, just beside her, his knee inches from her shoulder. When she laughed at a story one of his friends told about a fishing trip gone wrong, Tristan watched her laugh the way someone watches a candle, steady, quiet, completely absorbed. His friend Marcus noticed too. Marcus was tall, easy-mannered, the kind of man who smiled with his whole face and touched your arm when he talked to you. He asked Madeline about veterinary school, and she told him about Biscuit, the 3-legged clinic cat, and Marcus leaned in with genuine interest and said he'd always wanted a rescue animal. "You should come by the clinic sometime," Madeline said. "We have adoption days on Saturdays." "I might take you up on that." Marcus smiled, warm and open. Tristan appeared at her side like he'd materialized from the wall. "Marcus adopting an animal," he said, his voice dry and easy, "would last about 3 days before the animal adopted someone more responsible." Marcus laughed. Harsh, but probably accurate. But Tristan didn't laugh. He stood beside Madeline, with one hand resting on the back of the couch behind her, not touching her but claiming the space around her with a certainty that was impossible to miss. Marcus glanced between them, raised his eyebrows by a fraction, and smoothly changed the subject to football. Later, when the guests started leaving and Madeline helped him collect plates, she paused by the sink. "Marcus seems nice," she said, carefully neutral. Tristan stacked glasses without looking at her. "He's all right." He seemed interested in the clinic. He seemed interested in more than the clinic. She bit her lip to keep from smiling. He caught it anyway. The tips of his ears went faintly red. A detail she filed away like a secret. "Jealousy looks strange on you," she said. "I don't get jealous." "Okay." "I don't." I said okay. He set the last glass down, harder than necessary, and exhaled through his nose. She turned back to the sink, but her chest was full of light, fizzing and warm, like champagne bubbles rising. 3 days later, she knocked on his door at 7 in the evening, holding her laptop. "Movie night," she announced. "My pick." He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "What are we watching?" "A romantic comedy." His face went through several stages. Surprise, horror, resignation. "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious. It has a 92% audience score." "Audience scores mean nothing." "You're watching it." He let her in, protesting the entire walk to the couch. She set up the laptop on the coffee table, made herself comfortable against the cushions, and pressed play. He sat beside her with the posture of a man enduring a medical procedure. The movie was about a florist and a bookstore owner in a small town. There were misunderstandings and rain scenes and a golden retriever that appeared at emotionally convenient moments. Madeline loved every second of it. Tristan groaned audibly at the first kiss scene and muttered something about predictable writing. "Shh," she said. "He's known her for 3 days. That's not love, that's a lease agreement. Tristan, the dog is the only believable character." She threw a cushion at him. He caught it one-handed and set it on his lap with exaggerated dignity. But she noticed, when the couple in the film had their final scene, standing on a bridge under string lights, and the florist said something about choosing the same person every morning, Tristan went quiet. His jaw relaxed. His eyes stayed on the screen a beat longer than someone who truly hated it would allow. When the credits rolled, she turned to him, triumphant. "You liked it." "I survived it. There's a difference." "You got quiet at the bridge scene." "I was composing my will." She laughed, full and bright, and he watched her the way he'd watched her at the lunch, like her laughter was something he wanted to keep. "Fine," he said. "You owe me now." "What do I owe you?" "A horror movie. Tomorrow night. My apartment, my pick, no complaints." She felt a flutter she couldn't blame on the wine she hadn't even been drinking. Tomorrow night. His apartment. In the dark. "Deal," she said. She gathered her laptop and walked to the door. He followed, close behind, and when she turned to say goodnight, she realized how near he was. Close enough to see the faint shadow of stubble along his jaw. Close enough to smell cedar and something warm underneath, something that was just him. "Good night," she whispered. "Good night, Madeline." There it was again. Her name spoken low like a word he was learning to hold gently. She walked across the hall to her door, unlocked it, stepped inside, and leaned against it with her eyes closed. Tomorrow night, in the dark. With him. He changed his shirt twice before she knocked. The first one was black, which felt too deliberate. The second was a grey Henley that he'd owned for years and never thought about until tonight, when he stood in front of the bathroom mirror and thought about it for an embarrassing amount of time. He settled on a dark green pullover and told himself he didn't care what he looked like. He was a grown man. This was a movie, on his couch, with a woman he was absolutely not trying to impress. He opened a bag of popcorn, put it in a bowl because the bag felt too casual, took it out of the bowl and put it back in the bag because the bowl felt too formal. Then he stood in his kitchen, staring at a bag of popcorn like it held the answers to something much bigger than corn. The knock came at 7 sharp. She was wearing a sweater that was too big for her, soft, cream-colored, falling past her wrists so only her fingertips showed. Her hair was down, which she almost never wore. It fell past her shoulders in loose waves that caught the hallway light. She smelled like vanilla and something faintly green like crushed leaves. "Ready?" she asked, and her smile was nervous at the edges. "Born ready. Get in here." He'd chosen a film that was more atmosphere than gore. An old house, creaking hallways, shadows that moved wrong. He wasn't trying to traumatize her. He was trying to maintain plausible deniability for whatever happened when the lights were off and the music got tense. They sat on the couch, a responsible distance apart, popcorn bag between them. The movie started slow. Long, quiet shots of empty rooms. A woman walking through fog. Madeline watched with her knees pulled up to her chest, arms wrapped around them, her eyes wide and fixed on the screen. Tristan watched the movie. Then he watched her watching the movie. Then he forced himself to watch the movie again. The first scare came at the 20-minute mark. A door slamming. Nothing extraordinary. But Madeline flinched sideways, and her hand shot out and grabbed his arm. She didn't let go. He looked down at her fingers, small and tight around his forearm, and felt his pulse shift into a gear he didn't recognize. She mumbled an apology without taking her eyes off the screen. He said nothing. He did not move his arm. The second scare was worse. A face in a mirror. She gasped and pressed into his side, her shoulder against his chest, her head tilting instinctively toward his neck. The popcorn bag fell to the floor. Neither of them picked it up. By the third scare, she was fully against him, her knees tucked up, her body curled into his side like she'd been designed to fit there. Her breath came in quick, shallow pulls against his neck, warm and unsteady, and every exhale sent a current through him that had nothing to do with the movie. He put his arm around her, not dramatically, not with any grand gesture. He simply let it fall across her shoulders, his hand resting on her upper arm, his thumb brushing the soft fabric of her sweater in a motion so small he wasn't even sure he was doing it. She settled into him like a held breath finally releasing. They stayed like that. 20 minutes. 30. The movie played on, but neither was watching anymore. Not really. He was aware of the weight of her against his ribs, the smell of vanilla mixing with the scent of his own apartment. The way her fingers had moved from his forearm to his chest, resting flat over his heart, and he wondered if she could feel how fast it was beating. She tilted her head up. He looked down. Their faces were close, closer than they'd ever been. He could see the small constellation of freckles across her nose, faint and gold, visible only from this distance. Her lips were parted. Her eyes moved between his, left, right, left, searching for something. Permission, maybe. Or courage. He leaned in, slowly. So slowly that the air between them seemed to thicken and hold its shape. His nose brushed hers. She inhaled. His hand tightened on her shoulder. Their lips were a breath apart. A crash from the movie shattered the silence. The screen flashed white. She jumped hard, her forehead knocking against his chin. She yelped. He winced, and just like that, the moment split open and fell apart. She pulled back, laughing and apologizing at the same time, one hand on her forehead, the other covering her mouth. He rubbed his chin and tried to look annoyed, but the corner of his mouth betrayed him. "This movie is a menace," she said, breathless. "You literally headbutted me. You literally chose this movie." They looked at each other, and the laughter faded into something quieter, something that sat between them like a question neither was brave enough to answer yet. She left shortly after. At the door, she stood on her toes and pressed her lips to his cheek, quick, deliberate, her hand resting on his chest for balance. Then she was across the hall and gone, and he was standing in his doorway with popcorn on the floor and a heartbeat that refused to settle. He didn't sleep that night. At 6 in the morning, he sat on the edge of his bed and called his mother. "It's early," she said, her voice soft with sleep. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. I need to tell you something," he told her. All of it. From the broken-down car to the confrontation to the tears in his office. He told her that Madeline was the daughter of the woman who had destroyed their family, and that she had known nothing, not a single detail, until he'd thrown it at her like a weapon. He told her that Madeline had confronted her own mother and left home, that she lived next door now, that she was kind and stubborn and brave in a way that made his chest ache. He didn't say the word love, not yet, but his mother heard it anyway. The line was quiet for a long time. "Children don't carry their parents' sins," she said. "You know that. I needed to hear you say it. If she's everything you've just described, then I'd like to meet her." He closed his eyes. The relief was physical, a loosening in his shoulders, a breath that came easier than any had in weeks. "I'll set it up, a dinner, just the three of us. Make it somewhere comfortable. Not a restaurant. I want to see who she is when she's not trying to impress anyone." He smiled. His mother had always known how to read people. It was the one thing his father had never been able to fool away. "I'll cook," he said. "You'll burn something." "I'll order in and put it on plates." She laughed, the warm, full laugh that he'd spent years fighting to bring back. "That's my boy. I'll be there." He hung up and set the phone on the nightstand. The morning light pressed through the curtains in that pale, early way that made everything look new. He thought about freckles across a nose, about vanilla, about an almost kiss that still hummed on his skin, like a note that hadn't finished sounding. Soon, he thought. Soon. 3 outfits lay on Madeline's bed like fallen soldiers. A blouse that felt too stiff. A cardigan that felt too casual. A dress that felt like she was trying too hard. She stood in front of the mirror in her underwear, hands on her hips, staring at her reflection with the kind of focused panic usually reserved for final exams and near-miss car accidents. She was meeting his mother tonight. The woman whose marriage had been destroyed by her own mother. The woman Tristan had held on a kitchen floor at 2 in the morning. The woman who had rebuilt herself from nothing and come out the other side whole. Madeline wanted to be worthy of sitting across from her. She settled on a simple top. Dark red soft fabric, nothing that announced itself, and black pants. She brushed her hair down, then pulled it half up, then took it down again. She put on small earrings her father had given her for her 18th birthday. Tiny gold studs, subtle, steady, like him. At 7, she crossed the hall and knocked. Tristan opened the door, and she could tell immediately that he'd cleaned the apartment with military precision. The counters gleamed. The couch cushions were perfectly arranged. A candle burned on the coffee table, something woodsy and warm. And the dining table was set for 3 with plates that matched, which she happened to know didn't happen on regular days. "You look like you're about to pass out," he said. "I might." "Don't. She'll love you." "How do you know?" He looked at her for a moment. Something moved behind his eyes. Not amusement, not confidence, but something softer. Something that looked like faith. "Because I know her," he said. The buzzer rang 20 minutes later. He went to the door. Madeline stood near the table, her fingers laced together in front of her, her heart beating in her throat. The door opened, and a woman walked in who looked nothing like what Madeline had expected, and exactly like what she should have known. She was tall, elegant in the way that has nothing to do with clothing and everything to do with how a person carries the weight they've survived. Her hair was dark, threaded with silver at the temples, and her eyes, the same green as Tristan's, were warm and direct. She saw Madeline, and without a word, without hesitation, she crossed the room and pulled her into a hug. Not a polite hug, a real one. Arms firm, hand on the back of Madeline's head, the kind of embrace that says, "I know this is hard, and you're welcome here." Madeline's eyes burned. She blinked fast and held on. "I'm Helen," the woman said, pulling back just enough to look at her. "And you must be the one who's been keeping my son from returning my calls on time." Tristan groaned from somewhere behind them. "Mom." Helen winked at Madeline. "He used to call me every night. Now it's every other night. I had to investigate." Madeline laughed, a shaky, relieved laugh that released something tight in her chest. "I'm Madeline. I'm so glad to meet you." "Sit," Helen said, guiding her to the table with a hand on her arm. "Tell me everything. Start with veterinary school, and don't leave anything out." The dinner was take-out Italian transferred onto real plates, Tristan's compromise with honesty, and the conversation moved like a river finding its natural course. Helen asked about Madeline's studies, about the clinic, about Biscuit the 3-legged cat, and listened with the kind of attention that made Madeline feel seen in a way she hadn't felt since her father was alive. Helen talked too, about the hospital, about David, her fiancé, who had apparently learned to cook her favorite soup and made it every Sunday without being asked. About the engagement ring she hadn't wanted, because she said she'd rather he spend the money on a trip together. But he'd bought both, and she'd pretended to be annoyed for exactly 1 hour before crying on his shoulder. Madeline watched Tristan while his mother told stories. His face changed when Helen spoke. The hard edges softened, the tension in his jaw released. His eyes held a tenderness he showed no one else. This was the man his mother had raised. Underneath the sarcasm and the walls and the grease-stained hands, this was who he was. She loved that man. The thought arrived without warning, fully formed, settling into her chest like it had always been there and was just now making itself known. She looked down at her plate, took a breath. When the evening wound down and Helen stood to leave, she hugged Madeline again at the door. Longer this time. "You're good," Helen whispered. So quiet only Madeline could hear. "Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." Madeline nodded, not trusting her voice. Helen kissed Tristan's cheek, gave him a look that communicated an entire conversation without a single word, and left. The apartment went quiet. They stood in the living room. The candle still flickered on the coffee table. The plates were still on the table. The air between them was thick and charged, like the space before a summer storm, when everything goes still and the light changes color. Tristan turned to her. She looked up at him. Neither spoke. He closed the distance in 2 steps. His hands found her face. Both hands, palms warm against her cheeks, fingers sliding into her hair. He tilted her head up gently, his thumbs brushing the line of her jaw. His eyes searched hers for one last second, as if giving her room to stop him. She didn't. He kissed her. Not gently, not carefully. He kissed her like a man who had spent months building a dam and had finally deliberately let it break. His mouth pressed against hers with a hunger that startled them both, and she felt the force of it travel through her entire body, from her lips, down through her chest into her stomach all the way to her fingertips, which grabbed the front of his shirt and held on. He pulled her closer. One hand at the back of her neck, the other at the small of her back, pressing her into him until there was no space left. She rose on her toes, her arms wrapping around his neck, her fingers threading through his hair. The taste of wine lingered between them, warm and faintly sweet. His lips moved against hers slowly now, slower, like he wanted to memorize the shape of her. She made a small sound against his mouth, something between a sigh and a breath. He pulled back just enough to look at her. His forehead rested against hers. His breathing was unsteady. His hands trembled, something she filed away in the deepest part of her, knowing instinctively that this man did not tremble. "I've wanted to do that," he said, his voice rough, "since the day you pointed your finger at my chest and told me off in my own shop." She laughed softly, her lips still tingling, her heart still racing. "That long?" "Longer. But that's when I stopped pretending." She kissed him again, softer this time, a slow, deliberate press of her lips against his that said everything she wasn't ready to say out loud. They stayed like that for a long time, standing in his living room, the candle burning low, the city quiet outside, holding each other like two people who had found something they hadn't been looking for and were terrified and grateful in equal measure. When she finally went back to her apartment that night, she didn't turn on the lights. She sat on her bed in the dark, touched her lips with her fingertips, and smiled. The taste of him stayed with her until morning. They had been together for 11 days when the past came knocking. Not knocking, pounding. 3 heavy strikes against Tristan's door at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night, the kind of knock that doesn't ask permission but demands entry. Madeline was curled against his side on the couch, her bare feet tucked under a throw blanket, a veterinary textbook open on her lap, and a highlighter between her teeth. He'd been reading something on his phone with one hand, the other tracing lazy circles on her knee through the blanket, a habit he'd picked up without noticing, and she'd welcomed without commenting. The pounding made her jump. He went still. He knew that knock. He'd grown up with it, the sound of his father arriving home after a trial he'd won, announcing himself to the house like a headline, confident, entitled, loud. "Stay here," he said. He got up and opened the door. Richard Oakley stood in the hallway in a suit that probably cost more than most people's rent. His tie was loosened, his face was flushed, his eyes, dark, sharp, the ones Tristan had inherited and resented, were burning. "Tell me it's not true," Richard said. Tristan leaned against the doorframe the way he always did when he wanted to appear more relaxed than he was. "Depends on what you've heard. Don't play games with me." Richard's voice was low and controlled, but the control was cracking. "You're involved with her, with Diane's daughter. Her name is Madeline. I don't care what her name is. Do you understand what this looks like, what people will say?" "People." Tristan repeated the word like it tasted rotten. "That's what you're worried about, people." Richard stepped forward. Tristan didn't move. "I'm worried about this family." "What family? The one you blew up when you spent years sleeping with someone who wasn't your wife?" The hallway went quiet. Somewhere below, a door opened and closed. A dog barked, normal life continuing around a moment that was anything but. Richard's jaw tightened. "I didn't come here to relitigate the past." "Then why did you come?" "To tell you to end it. Before it becomes a mess neither of us can clean up." Tristan straightened. The lean against the doorframe was gone. He stood at his full height now, shoulders squared, and looked at his father with the kind of calm that carries more weight than shouting ever could. "Let me make something clear," he said. "You lost the right to have an opinion about my life the night Mom sat on the kitchen floor in her scrubs and cried until she couldn't breathe. You lost it when you moved another woman into her house before the sheets were cold. You don't get to stand at my door and tell me who I can or can't be with. Not now. Not ever." Richard's nostrils flared. "You're making a mistake." And if you pressure her, if you call her, approach her, or make her feel for 1 second that she should walk away from me, I will make everything public. Every detail, every year, every lie. Your partners, your clients, your country club friends, they'll all know exactly who Richard Oakley is behind the cufflinks. Silence. It wasn't an empty threat, and they both knew it. Tristan had never been the kind of man who bluffed. He'd learned early that the truth was a better weapon than any lie, and he carried it the way other men carried grudges. Steady, loaded, ready when needed. Richard stared at him for a long moment. Something shifted in his face. Not regret, not exactly, but the recognition of a wall he couldn't climb. He turned and walked down the hallway without another word. The elevator doors opened, closed, and then it was quiet again. Tristan stood in the doorway, hands braced against the frame, breathing slowly. The adrenaline was still buzzing through him, hot, electric, humming in his forearms and the back of his neck. He closed his eyes and held himself still until it passed. When he turned around, Madeline was standing in the middle of the living room. The textbook was closed. The highlighter was on the table. Her arms were crossed, not in anger, but in the way people hold themselves when they're trying to keep something inside from spilling out. "You heard," he said. "Everything." He walked toward her, stopped a few feet away. He didn't trust himself to touch her yet. His hands were still shaking from the confrontation, and he didn't want her to feel the leftover storm. But she closed the distance herself, stepping forward and pressing her palms flat against his chest. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for not backing down." There was nothing to back down from. He doesn't get a vote. She looked up at him. Her eyes were bright but not tearful. Something in them was fiercer than he'd seen before, a hardness that suited her, that reminded him she was not fragile, even when she was soft. "My mother called yesterday," she said. He hadn't known that. She hadn't mentioned it. She heard too, I don't know how. Maybe Richard told her, maybe she figured it out. She said she couldn't support this, that I was being selfish, that I was choosing a stranger over my own family. Madeline's voice stayed level, but her fingers pressed slightly harder against his chest, as if anchoring herself. "I told her that I was choosing my own life, that no one, not her, not Richard, not anyone, gets to decide who I love, and that if she wanted to be part of my life, she would have to accept that." He covered her hands with his, held them there over his heartbeat. "What did she say?" She hung up. The words landed quietly. No drama, no tears, just the simple, brutal fact of a mother choosing distance over acceptance. He pulled her in, wrapped both arms around her, one hand cradling the back of her head, and held her against him with a steadiness he hoped she could feel through every layer. She pressed her face into his chest, and he felt her breathe. One long, slow inhale, then out. "Her loss," he said into her hair. "Not yours." She didn't answer, but her arms tightened around him, and she stayed there, breathing against him, and he understood that some wounds don't need words. They need presence, the simple, stubborn act of someone refusing to let go. They stood like that for a long time. The throw blanket lay crumpled on the couch. The textbook sat abandoned. The city hummed outside the windows, indifferent to the two people standing in an apartment in the middle of it, holding each other up against a world that kept trying to pull them apart. Later, when she finally pulled back, she looked up at him and smiled. Small, tired, real. "We're going to be okay," she said, not as a question. He kissed her forehead, let his lips linger. "We're going to be more than okay." He had rehearsed it in the shower, in the car on the way to work, in his head while tightening bolts and checking fluid lines and pretending that his hands weren't buzzing with something that had nothing to do with engines. The words were simple, 4 of them. "Be my girlfriend." Ordinary words, the kind people say in high school hallways and college dining halls. But Tristan had never said them to anyone, and at 29, standing in the doorway between his kitchen and living room, while Madeline sat cross-legged on his couch, reading a case study on canine orthopedics, the 4 words felt enormous. She looked up, sensing his gaze. "What?" "I want to ask you something." She closed the textbook, gave him her full attention, the way she always did, with those steady brown eyes that made him feel like the only person in any room. He crossed the room and sat beside her, took her hand. Her fingers were warm and small inside his, and he noticed the faint ink stain on her index finger from highlighting notes. He rubbed his thumb across it without thinking. "I want this to be real," he said. "Not just neighbors who kiss, not just two people who fell into something because of proximity and shared walls. I want you, officially, completely." Her lips parted. Her eyes filled, not with sadness but with something bright and full like light seen through water. "Madeline Marlowe, be my girlfriend." She didn't answer with words. She launched herself at him, arms around his neck, her whole body pressing into his so suddenly that he fell back against the couch cushions with her on top of him, laughing into his shoulder. "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes before you even finished the sentence." He wrapped his arms around her and held her there, her weight against his chest, her hair falling across his face. He breathed her in, vanilla, and the faint antiseptic trace that clung to her from the clinic, a combination that shouldn't have worked, but that he'd come to associate with everything good. That night, the apartment held a different kind of silence. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of something unspoken that filled every corner. She was in his kitchen, washing 2 wine glasses. He came up behind her and placed his hands on the counter, one on each side of her, caging her gently without touching. She went still. The water ran over her fingers. He leaned down and pressed his lips to the curve of her neck, slow, deliberate. He felt her pulse jump beneath his mouth. She turned off the faucet, turned around, looked up at him with eyes that held no hesitation, only a quiet, steady trust that nearly undid him. "Stay tonight," he said. His voice was rough, barely above a whisper. She nodded. He took her hand and led her to the bedroom. The lights were low, just the bedside lamp casting warm amber across the sheets. He turned to face her and cradled her face in his hands, tilting it up, searching her expression for any doubt. There was none. He kissed her slowly, not like the first kiss, which had been all urgency and broken restraint. This one was careful, reverent. His lips moved against hers like a question asked again and again, and each time she answered by leaning closer, by opening to him, by letting her hands slide up his chest and pull the fabric of his shirt. He undressed her the way someone unwraps something precious, with patience and attention to every detail. Each button, each layer, each inch of skin revealed made him pause, made his breath catch. He traced the line of her collarbone with his fingertips, pressed his mouth to her shoulder, felt her shiver under his touch. When he realized she had never been with anyone before, something shifted inside him, deep, tectonic, permanent. A protectiveness that was already fierce became something closer to devotion. He slowed even further, held her closer, whispered against her skin that she was safe, that he was hers, that there was no rush and no expectation and nothing in the world outside this room. She pulled him down to her. Her fingers threaded through his hair. Her breath warmed the hollow of his throat. And when they came together, it was slow and trembling and full of a tenderness that surprised them both. He told her she was beautiful. Between kisses, between touches, between breaths that came faster and deeper. He told her with his hands and his mouth and his voice, mapping every part of her like she was a landscape he intended to memorize. She whispered his name, just his name, nothing else. And the sound of it in her voice, unguarded and raw, made something crack open in his chest that he knew would never close again. They moved together without rush, the sheets tangled around them, the lamp cast their shadows against the wall, 2 shapes becoming one, pulling apart, returning. The world outside was gone. There was only warmth and breath and the sound of his name on her lips and hers on his. Afterward, she lay with her head on his chest, her fingers drawing absent patterns on his stomach. His arm held her close, his hand spanning the width of her lower back. He could feel her heartbeat against his ribs, fast, then slowing, matching his. "I didn't know," she said softly. "Didn't know what?" "That it could feel like that, like being found." He pressed his lips to the top of her head and left them there, breathing her in. His throat was tight. His eyes were burning. This woman, this quiet force wrapped in softness, had walked into his life through a broken car and a family he'd tried to hate, and she had undone every wall he'd ever built. "You have no idea," he murmured into her hair, "what you've done to me." She tilted her face up and kissed his jaw, then his chin, then the corner of his mouth. They didn't sleep for a long time. They talked, they touched, they drifted and returned, learning each other in the dark, in no hurry for the morning to come. When dawn finally arrived, grey and soft through the curtains, she was asleep in his arms, her breathing slow and even, her lips curved in the faintest smile. He watched her, traced the line of her cheek with one finger. Mine, he thought, not with possession, with wonder. Coffee at 6:30. Always his apartment, because his machine was better and she refused to admit it. She'd shuffle across the hall in his oversized shirt and the socks she kept stealing from his drawer, thick grey ones that swallowed her feet. And he'd have 2 mugs ready on the counter, hers with too much milk and a spoon of honey, his black. They'd stand side by side at the kitchen window, shoulders touching, watching the city wake up in silence. Not because they had nothing to say, but because the silence between them had become its own language. Comfortable, full. Some mornings, she'd lean her head against his arm while she drank. Some mornings, he'd rest his chin on top of her head and close his eyes, breathing in the warmth of her, letting the quiet fill the spaces that used to be occupied by anger. The routine grew around them like ivy, slowly, steadily, until it covered everything. She'd leave for campus or the clinic, and he'd text her halfway through the morning. Never anything grand. A photo of a car he was working on. A complaint about a supplier. Once, a picture of himself holding a wrench with the caption, "Thinking about you," that made her laugh so hard her clinical supervisor asked if she was all right. She'd come home with stories. A puppy who'd eaten an entire rubber toy and wagged through the surgery. Her parrot at the clinic, who had learned to say good boy and used it on everyone, including the vet. She told these stories with her whole body, hands moving, eyes wide, voice rising and falling, and he'd sit on the couch watching her like she was performing for an audience of one, which she was. Evenings were theirs. Dinner together, alternating apartments, alternating who cooked. She was better at pasta. He was better at steak. Neither was good at salad, so they bought it pre-made and pretended that counted. They watched movies. They argued about movies. She maintained that romantic comedies were the highest art form. He maintained that she was objectively wrong, but watched them with her anyway. His commentary growing quieter with each film until one night she caught him smiling at a scene he would have mocked a month ago. "You're enjoying this," she whispered. "I'm tolerating this. You're smiling. That's a muscle spasm." She poked her index finger into his chest, right in the center. The exact gesture she'd made that day in his office, when she was furious and brave and didn't know she was changing his life. He looked down at her finger, looked up at her face and grinned. It had become their thing, their private language. When she wanted to make a point, she poked. When he wanted to tease her, he'd gently take her hand and press her finger to his chest himself, as if to say, "Go ahead, I'm ready." "You know," he said one night, catching her hand mid-poke, "that move is the reason we're here." "What do you mean?" "That day in the shop, when you were yelling at me and you put your finger right here." He held her hand flat against his chest. "That was the exact moment I knew I was finished." She tilted her head. "Finished being mean to me. Finished pretending I didn't want you." She kissed him for that, long and slow and sweet. The months folded into each other, warm and alive. Her relationship with her mother stayed thin, occasional texts, brief calls, the kind of contact that functioned but didn't nourish. It ached, and some nights she felt it, a dull pull behind her ribs when she saw mothers and daughters in the grocery store or heard a friend mention Sunday dinners. But she didn't let it grow into bitterness. She let it sit where it was, quiet and honest, and focused on what she had instead of what she'd lost. And what she had was more than she'd ever imagined. On the morning of her graduation, she woke up in Tristan's bed to find a single white rose on the pillow beside her and a note in his handwriting. "Proud of you. Get dressed. Today is yours." The ceremony was held outdoors under a wide canopy of trees, with rows of folding chairs and a wooden stage, and the particular smell of cut grass mixed with perfume and pride. Madeline sat among her classmates in her cap and gown, her hands trembling slightly as she held the program. 4 years. 4 years of studying and working and holding her ground when people told her to choose a different path. She'd done it. When her name was called, she walked across the stage, took the diploma, and felt the weight of it. Not just the paper, but everything it represented. Her father would have been proud. She knew this the way she knew her own name. The thought made her throat tight. She found Tristan in the crowd as she descended the steps. He was standing in the third row, dressed in a dark shirt and jacket, clapping with an expression she'd never seen before. His eyes were wet. She walked toward him through the crowd of families and flowers and camera flashes. He met her halfway, took her face in his hands, and kissed her forehead. "Dr. Marlowe," he said. "Not a doctor yet. Still have boards. Don't ruin this for me." She laughed, and he pulled her into a hug that lifted her slightly off the ground. When he set her down, he kept hold of her hands, and then he dropped to one knee. The noise around them faded. Classmates turned. Professors paused mid-conversation. A friend of hers gasped somewhere to the left. Madeline looked down at him, her diploma still in one hand, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her temples. "Since the day I told you to disappear from my life," he said, his voice steady and clear and carrying, "I have not been able to get you out of it. You showed up under a broken hood, knowing nothing about engines, and somehow took apart every single thing I believed about the world." He reached into his jacket pocket and opened a small box. A ring. Simple, elegant, perfect. "I don't want to try anymore. I don't want a single morning without your terrible socks in my drawer. Marry me." She was nodding before he finished, tears streaming. Laughing and crying at the same time, the diploma pressed against her chest. "Yes. Yes, before you even... yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, stood and kissed her while the crowd erupted around them. A figure stood near the edge of the crowd, half hidden behind a row of oak trees. Madeline saw her before anyone else did. Her mother wore a pale coat and sunglasses pushed up on her head, standing the way she always stood, slightly apart, watching from a distance that felt both deliberate and lonely. She held a small bouquet of white flowers against her chest. The proposal crowd had thinned. Tristan was talking to a group of her classmates. One arm gestured loosely as he answered questions about the ring, about timing, about how long he'd been planning it. He caught Madeline's eye across the lawn and tilted his head. A silent question. She gave him a small nod that said she needed a minute. She walked toward her mother. The space between them shrank slowly, each step carrying the weight of months of silence and careful distance. Her mother's face came into focus, the makeup slightly heavier than usual, the careful smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, the bouquet gripped tightly in both hands. "Congratulations, sweetheart." Her mother's voice was soft, genuine. She held out the flowers. Madeline took them. "Thank you for coming. I wouldn't have missed your graduation. Not for anything." They stood facing each other. Around them, families took photos, graduates threw caps. Someone's father was crying into a handkerchief while his wife rubbed his back. Normal joy. The kind of joy that doesn't carry complications. Her mother reached out and adjusted Madeline's cap, which had shifted during Tristan's hug. The gesture was so familiar, so deeply embedded in muscle memory, that Madeline's chest ached. "I saw what happened," her mother said quietly. "The proposal." Madeline waited. "I can't pretend I'm happy about it, Maddie, I just can't. Not with everything involved." "I know. But I can see that he loves you." That much was clear from 50 feet away. Madeline held her mother's gaze. "He does. And I love him. And I'm going to marry him." Her mother's jaw tightened. Not in anger, in something closer to grief. The grief of a woman watching her daughter choose a path she couldn't follow. "I don't approve," she said. "I need you to know that." "I don't need your approval, Mom. I never did. I just wanted your presence." The words hung between them. Her mother blinked, looked away, looked back. "If you ever need me," she said, "you know how to reach me." Madeline stepped forward and wrapped her arms around her mother. The hug lasted longer than either of them expected. Her mother's perfume, the same jasmine scent she'd worn since Madeline was a child, settled around them both, and for a moment, just a moment, the distance collapsed. They pulled apart. Her mother squeezed her hand once, turned, and walked back toward the parking lot. She didn't look back. Madeline watched her go. The bouquet trembled slightly in her hands. Then she turned and walked back to Tristan, who opened his arms without being asked. 7 months later, the chapel was full of light. Late afternoon sun poured through tall windows, casting golden rectangles across the aisle, and the wooden pews and the faces of everyone who had come to watch two people choose each other, in spite of everything that had tried to keep them apart. Helen sat in the front row in a sage green dress, David beside her, his hand steady on hers. Her eyes were already wet before the music began. Madeline's friends, Clara, Jess and Sophie, stood in a line near the altar, holding small bouquets, biting their lips against the tears they'd promised not to cry. The front pew on Madeline's side had an empty space where her mother would have been. Tristan's father was absent too. These absences were not accidental. They were a decision made together on a Tuesday night over takeout, with honesty and sadness, and the understanding that some doors needed to stay closed for the ones that mattered to stay open. Madeline walked down the aisle alone. Her choice. She wore ivory, simple and fitted, with small pearl earrings, the ones Helen had given her the week before, pressing them into her palm with a whispered, "Something borrowed." Tristan stood at the altar and forgot how to breathe. He'd seen her in 100 moments by now. Morning light, late nights, mid-argument, mid-laughter. But this, her walking toward him, steady and sure, with eyes that held no doubt, was something new. Something that carved itself into his memory, with a permanence he would carry for the rest of his life. When she reached him, he took her hands. They were shaking. His were too. He spoke first. "I spent years believing that love was just another word for suffering, that it always ended in someone on a kitchen floor at 2 in the morning, and then you appeared, standing over an engine you couldn't fix, looking at it like determination alone would make it start. And somehow, without trying, you took apart every wall I had. I'm not the man I was before you, and I never want to be again." She squeezed his hands, took a breath. "I spent years wondering why you looked at me the way you did, like I was someone to avoid, and I never imagined that behind that look was a man who would fight for me, protect me and love me in a way I didn't know was possible. You are the most loyal, stubborn and impossibly good man I have ever known. And I choose you, every morning, every argument, every terrible horror movie. I choose you." Laughter rippled through the chapel. Helen pressed a tissue to her eyes. David squeezed her hand. That evening, as the reception wound down and the last song played, Madeline checked her phone. One new message. From her mother. "I wish you every happiness, my girl, today and always." She read it twice, pressed the phone against her heart, and went back to the dance floor where her husband was waiting with an open hand and a smile that told her everything words couldn't. The sand was warm under her bare feet, the kind of warmth that seeps in slowly and stays, like a hand placed gently against skin and left there. Madeline stood at the edge of the water, toes sinking into the wet shoreline, the hem of her white dress lifting in the breeze. The ocean stretched out in front of her, impossibly blue, impossibly clear, and the afternoon light painted everything in shades of gold and amber. Behind her, the small beachfront house Tristan had rented sat among the palms, white curtains billowing through the open windows. He had planned everything, every detail, the flights, the house, the route from the airport, the stocked kitchen, the playlist for the drive. He'd even packed her bag when she wasn't looking, and included the one pillow she couldn't sleep without, the flat, worn one she'd had since college that he called a historical artifact. She rested both hands on her belly. 6 months now. Round and firm and alive, pressing against her dress in a way that still surprised her every morning when she looked in the mirror. She could feel the baby move sometimes, a slow rolling shift like a fish turning in still water, and each time it happened, she went quiet and pressed her palms flat and waited for it again. "You're standing too close to the water," she turned. Tristan was walking down the sandy path from the house barefoot, carrying a bag in one hand and 2 bottles of water in the other. His hair was lighter from the sun, pushed back from his forehead, and his skin had darkened in the 3 days they'd been here. He looked relaxed in a way she rarely saw back home, shoulders loose, jaw unclenched, the permanent line between his eyebrows almost gone. "The water is 4 inches deep," she said, "and you have no shoes on." "I'm at the beach, Tristan." He set the bag down on the sand, opened it, and pulled out a folded towel, sunscreen, a hat she hadn't asked for, and a container of sliced fruit. He placed the hat on her head and adjusted the brim. She let him. "You pack me a hat. The sun is strong. You also packed my bag without telling me. You would have forgotten the pillow." "I would not have forgotten the pillow." He looked at her, one eyebrow raised. "Fine. I might have forgotten the pillow." He spread the towel on the sand and guided her down onto it with a hand on her lower back, steady and careful, as if she were made of something rare. She sat with a small groan, the kind that came from carrying extra weight in places her body was still adjusting to, and stretched her legs out in front of her. He sat beside her, uncapped the sunscreen, and began applying it to her shoulders without being asked. "I could do that myself," she said. "You could, but you're not going to let me." "Correct." His hands moved across her skin, slow, thorough, warm. She closed her eyes and let the sensations settle into her, the smell of coconut mixed with salt air, the sound of waves folding against the shore, his thumb pressing gently along the back of her neck, where tension always gathered. "You know," she said, "I'm pregnant, not incapable. You're carrying my son. Might be a daughter. Either way, while you're carrying them, the only thing you're carrying is this." He took her left hand and lifted it. The gold wedding band caught the sunlight. She laughed, full and bright and warm, the kind of laugh that came from the deepest part of her, from the place where fear and doubt had once lived, and now held only gratitude. He kissed her forehead, let his lips rest there, long enough for her to feel the warmth travel down through her chest and settle near the baby, as if even the child could sense it. They sat together watching the water. The past didn't disappear. It lived where it always had, in the quiet corners, in the occasional tension of a name mentioned, in the phone calls that didn't come, and the chairs left empty at celebrations. Her mother still kept her distance, loving from the outside in her imperfect, cautious way. His father remained a presence felt more than seen, a shadow that no longer darkened their doorstep. But between them, in this space they had built together, one morning and one evening and one stolen kiss at a time, there was something the past could not touch, something made of laughter over bad movies and pasta dinners, and a 3-legged cat named Biscuit, and an index finger pressed against a chest, and the night he first said her name like it mattered. Madeline leaned her head against his shoulder. He rested his cheek on top of her hair. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For stopping that day, on the road, when my car broke down. You could have driven past." He was quiet for a moment. His hand found hers and laced their fingers together, resting on the curve of her belly. "I almost did," he admitted. "What stopped you?" He turned his head and pressed his lips to her temple. "My mother raised me better than that." She smiled. The sun was beginning to lower, painting the sky in soft pinks and deep oranges, the water reflecting it all back like a mirror held up to something beautiful. He stood first, offered his hand, pulled her up gently. They walked along the shore, barefoot, the warm water washing over their feet with each wave. Her hand in his thumb tracing slow circles on her skin. The baby shifted once, and she pressed his palm to the spot so he could feel it. He stopped walking, looked down at his hand on her belly, looked at her, and smiled, not the guarded, sarcastic half-smile she'd first known, a real one, open and full and unafraid. They kept walking, slowly together, the sunset stretching out before them like a road with no end. Two people who had started as strangers, who had passed through anger and pain and misunderstanding, who had chosen each other not because the path was easy, but because the person beside them made every difficult step worth taking. The waves rolled in, the light turned golden, and they walked on, together, whole, finally home in each other. Leave your comment and share this story with someone special. It truly helps us keep bringing new stories to you. And if you want to follow every chapter of this emotional journey, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. Your support makes all the difference.